Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of SSX 2012. I played on the Xbox Series X via backwards compatibility, which means it's also available on the Xbox One, and if you still got it, Xbox 360 and PS3. So there is sort of a story in this. Basically, Griff has challenged a bunch of other riders to like these really extreme races and really extreme environments. And so these other snowboarding racers have come together to form SSX. And I mean, that is basically the story. So let's get into the audio, and the first thing I'm going to say about the audio is the soundtrack is totally okay. There's not a lot of songs on it that I really loved. I think there were maybe 2 or 3. But I also don't think the soundtrack matters that much because honestly, I didn't even notice it was playing most of the time when I was racing, so that was kind of unfortunate. Beyond that, I think the sound effects are pretty decent. I don't think they're mind-blowing by any stretch of the imagination. And the voiceover work is totally okay, but it's very minimal, so there's not a lot to praise or shit on there. Really, the majority of the voiceover work you hear is from DJ Atomica, who is sort of hosting the event from like a narration standpoint, and then the helicopter pilots that drop you off. But let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. And this is a snowboarding game. It's got some other elements in there, but at its core, it is a snowboarding game / extreme sports-ish game. And honestly, it's the things that they add onto it that start to drag the experience down. Because it's all about these really extreme environments, extreme mountains, that honestly takes away from what made SSX so fun. And it doesn't necessarily work in this game because there are like trick attack ones where you have to high score, but due to the design of the environment, it's far more difficult than it should be, to the point where it stops being as fun as it could be. The racing in the extreme environments isn't necessarily bad, but there are definitely times where it sucks ass, mostly because you can't see what's coming and you feel like you're getting shafted when you do run into those areas. The extreme elements are also meant to add like a gameplay thing, like when you're racing Everest, you have to have an oxygen tank and you have to pump oxygen in basically into your character. Or ice, you need ice picks to like better navigate, and crevices, you need to use a wingsuit on. The problem is like knowing whether or not you need to use the wingsuit or you can jump it is kind of a crapshoot. And it'll bleed a little into the controls, but steering the wingsuit is not so easy, and it doesn't necessarily blend well. The only of the extreme elements that I felt worked well was the avalanche one, and it switched perspectives, and that really threw me off at first, but like doing the avalanche was actually kind of fun, and I actually enjoyed that extreme element. As for the doing of tricks and whatnot, I think it's kind of lame compared to other games. You feel very limited in this game, honestly, and the way the maps are laid out doesn't always flow well with what you're doing, especially trying to incorporate that extreme environment thing that they're going for. But I mean, beyond that, I also want to say, like, each of the extreme environments, the levels as they are only like 5 races, 5 events long, so it's actually really short playing through each of them. It's kind of disappointing. There's also an element where you can buy new gear and upgrade gear, but most of the time you start with better gear than you can buy, so there's not a great reason to buy new gear. And also another thing I had major issues with, especially during the trick attack races, I don't know what you want to call them, is your character will like gravitate on their own towards rails, and it will happen while you're in the air. So you could be spinning, doing some wild, crazy aerial maneuver, and you get drawn towards a rail that you weren't planning to try and land on, and you'll crash into it and it'll fuck up your trick and combo. That happened to me way too many times, honestly, like to the point where it's starting to really piss me off. Also, there's this thing where your character will like land, but they'll land basically upside down just because there's a bit of ground up there, or like they'll land sideways. It doesn't work. It fucks up your tricks. I'd rather crash or bounce off of those or something. But that's gonna bleed into the controls, which are honestly pretty shit. The game steers you more than you steer you, which makes it very difficult to control where you're going so that you can jump in the direction that you want to jump, so that you can do the trick that you're trying to do, so that you can not crash into a wall while in the middle of the trick, or have to stop the trick early because you're going to land on a fucking wall or whatever it is. On top of that, your characters have zero fucking weight to them. They just, when they move so easily. They move way too quickly. Like, they really do fly around the screen, and you just don't have the control you want because of that. I think the controls are well mapped out, but the fact that your character can really just fly around the screen with minimal input from you, as well as the world steers you more than you steer you, it really takes away from the experience as a whole. Now, lastly, the graphics and visuals, and once again, they brought back some recognizable characters and they try to give them their own flair, but they toned it way back from the previous games, so it loses a certain unique element that, you know, SSX 3 had. The world itself is far less interesting than that in SSX 3 because all it ends up looking the same. Okay, yeah, this one will have crevices, this one will have ice, this will have, you know, rails, maybe this one has some pipelines, but it loses that, like, wackier sense, that over-the-top neon sense that the games previous have been known for. And while I'm not going to say that it looks bad, I just also don't think that the worlds are well mapped out. I mean, it's easy for the AIs because they're AIs and they can do everything perfectly, but it doesn't feel like the worlds are necessarily designed for human players. But it's a lot of whites, it's a lot of blues, it's bright and colorful for the most part. I do think it's interesting that they have some night races, but those don't add anything in a good way, I would say. Overall, visually, I think it stands out far less than its predecessors, which, I mean, kind of strips away from something that used to make it more unique. Honestly, to wrap this up, I was like really into SSX 3. I was so excited to see that it was on the game store and play it. But then I saw that they had another SSX, and I remember starting it back when. I don't remember finishing it, and replaying it now, I understand why I probably never finished it. Overall, SSX 2012 was going for some interesting things, and it really just kind of shit the bed. With what is available now, it just doesn't feel like it's worth going back and revisiting. I mean, maybe a new SSX game where they go back to like the SSX Tricky, SSX 3 era. I would never go back to the SSX 2012. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me what was your favorite snowboarding game? Is it Amped 3? Because you know what this made me long for? Playing some more Amped 3. Man, why is it that backwards compatible? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.